Hello and welcome to your first video for your Make It New painting. My name is Eric, and today we're going to be talking about taking a primed canvas, which we've talked about in previous videos. I have sketched my composition on top. I'm going to be doing Cezanne's Still Life with Skull. I did take a little bit of time here to sketch out fairly accurate proportions to translate from my source material to my painting. But nothing too dramatic, probably about a 15-20 minute drawing. Some of the colors and values here are pretty dramatic in my painting. Everybody's is going to be different, so it's difficult for me to anticipate everybody's painting. Hopefully we've talked about in your individual sessions, ways of approaching your painting more successfully. But I'm looking for background elements here. We have an almost black in the background, pretty heavy. Which actually creates a nice dramatic contrast for that skull. I like that. And then we have some pretty colorful fruit on the table and a cloth here once the table is represented there. Table, skull, and this negative space are all similar in tone as well. So a fair amount of colors to mix. I actually still have, for my wet palette, another really great thing about a wet palette is if you're paintings back to back, you can just use what you already have. For this first step, I'm really not going to be mixing too many colors. I might mix one or two, depending on how these colors translate to canvas. But I have a fairly dynamic palette, so I'm kind of happy with what I have. So I'm not going to make too many dramatic changes yet. There's nothing within my source material that I'm worried about as far as a color that I might not have. I did mix a little bit more black because we have a fair amount in the back here, but I'm kind of ready to go. Keep in mind, remember that this assignment is to change something about this painting, but at its core, this assignment is trying to emulate a master's style. So when I look at Cezanne's style here, I see looser brush strokes, I see a more painterly application, especially in areas like the background, where there's maybe some loose floral elements here. The skull is probably one of the tighter elements, but the cloth has not been fully fleshed out. The fruit is still a little bit rough, especially the background as well. So a looser application. I'm trying to emulate his style. And then at the 10-yard line, once I've done the majority of this painting, I'm thinking of a way to change something about this painting to make it my own. And I'm thinking something in the fruit. I might alter the skull. I'm not sure yet. But I know that I'm still going to be using this as an overall guide. So, to get going, we're going to be doing kind of as always, big to small, back to front. That is not always the smartest way of painting, but I would say it's probably a 90%. Pretty dark value in the back. I'm going to start working into some of my deeper black value here and pushing this deep value. One thing I like to do in paintings, it's a little bit lighter over here, is define some of my deepest and some of my lightest values very quickly throughout the painting. That way I can start to control contrast, and I can think about how the viewer is going to engage my work. So getting some of this deeper value in first, it's going to be good, especially when we come in and start adding very bold colors into the fruit and whatnot. It's going to be important that we have a steady background. So some of my paint has dried out just a little bit. I'm adding just a little bit of water, and I'm going back in. That's going to help get me going again. Remember, with a wet palette, acrylic paint is surprisingly malleable and can survive for a long time. It's one of people's biggest complaints with acrylic paint is that it dries too quickly and you lose a lot of product that, as you know, can be very expensive. But a wet palette keeps it pretty usable. I've had this palette for a few weeks now. And as I said, just minimal bits of water added to it has already made it easier to use. Sometimes too much water gives opacity issues or it's too transparent, but just a little bit of that water sometimes is perfect. So I am trying to place my fruit a little bit more specifically here. I'm still placing it fairly loosely as far as a bounding line. And then once I come in, I am going to soften that out so you can't see those lines. But I've showed various degrees of tightness in underpaintings, or sort of first passes in paintings. Some I just want much looser. Others, like this one, I might go just a little bit tighter. And that just kind of depends on your source, how complex your painting is, and how closely to your source material you want your painting to be. So there's all sorts of interesting things over here, but I don't think I'm going to try and place them too specifically yet. Definitely a lighter transition there. Triangle of sort of an earthen brown. I feel like that's going to be kind of ugly when I place it without cleaning my brush. But that's okay. Come on in here and just sort of blow it out for now. And then we'll come back and refine it on another layer. I'm not really going to wash off there, just to try and minimize how much of that earthen yellow I get the rest of my area here. I'm just going to clean it off with a towel there. So things are looking good. I'm pulling larger horizontal strokes. I'm trying to be a little bit more accurate with how I'm planning composition and elements that are going to be affected by my background. Once again, just added a little bit of water there, so my paint is not perfectly wet right now, but a little bit of finagling can get you by. A little bit of an earthen tone here mixed into that dark value. Not really sure how that's going to play out, but I'll soften this out too. It's too dramatic. Kind of like some deeper stuff in the center too. We'll get back in there. And then background comes all the way down, framing the table. Once again, my proportions are not perfect. I didn't grid off source material or spend an hour or more on my underpainting, or excuse me, my underdrawing planning stage. I just got it close. I think in that way, some things can sort of breathe while you're painting. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect proportions to still be a successful painting. Okay, background checked out. Pretty good. Once again, there's still lots and lots of detail in that background. Lots of value shifts and things that I haven't placed yet. But overall, not bad. Move it into an area you can maybe see a little bit better. So once again, lots of detail in there. Not worrying about it yet. It's too early to worry. Just a little bit. That paint's a little bit wet, but that'll be okay. Get it right there. Okay, so now into the foreground. There are some fairly dramatic things. This whitish blue cloth is a very dramatic form, as well as the table. Might be just a little bit low on white. So I'm going to get just a little bit more here. The dab of white here. Perfect. So the cloth there is definitely shining blue, but it is fairly blown out by white. I was using the 1.5" flat so far. I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch now that we're moving into the foreground with some smaller elements. The table and the negative space here are pretty similar in tone. This one a little bit too earthy. There's still some warmness in here that I haven't gotten yet. But once again, we're still in that underpainting, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to start on the table here and try and push a little bit of opacity. There's still the cloth there, table. Cloth and table are the two things I need to try and be focusing on right now, because everything else is on top of those things. the fruit and the skull. And if I get these right, it's going to be easier to lay out the things on top of it. A little bit of a darker value, placing in a section of shadow, maybe a vertical break there. Back to a lighter value. So some of the transitions I am trying to place just so I can see them later. But I'm really not trying to place them extremely accurately. It would slow me down too much. There's a pretty deep value, almost into that black. I'm going to grab a lot of that. A little bit of deeper value in there. So local color, if I can bring some of the deeper value from the negative space into the foreground, those value transitions are going to look more cohesive because there's similar colors being used. This is obviously not perfect. We're pushing space. Okay, it's a little bit lighter. Kind of mix that out. Oops, and down. Okay, pushing the table back. There's still a lot of fruit in the way, but I'm not too worried about it. We're just going to build up to the fruit and then take care of it once we get going. A little bit of a lighter value here. It's like a straight cad yellow. Usually that cad yellow comes in pretty bright, a little artificial. But if you mix it down, it's not too bad. Pretty bright section there. Building back to that. Remember, even if stuff isn't perfect right now as far as hue or even placement, that sort of blue-black in the back here, you can still edit, you can still push space as you're planning. These are all sort of casting minor cast shadows too. See if I can, without overdoing it, sort of accentuate the space. So once I place them in, they're more realistic. Okay, this is pretty nice there. Try and blow it out with a little bit of white so I can see it. It's my first piece of fruit. Color not there, but that's okay, we're still working. Second piece of fruit, got a pear here. Coming up, coming down. Remember, I'm not looking for perfect things here, I'm just trying to plan overall space and color. This has a little bit of that red in it. I definitely brought way too much red. Sort of just planning it out here. Hopefully that's not too dark of a value. Trying to find a good spot for this. You can still see it. A little green. Level that red out. When in doubt, there's a fair amount of that black right behind it. Pushing space. Grab that rag. Remember guys, this is still just my first pass. I'm attempting to block as much of this in kind of as quickly as possible. And even though I am still anticipating altering something in this painting, I don't really need to know what that is yet. I can still alter as I go. A little bit of water here. Shadow, shadow, shadow. This guy's got a shadow too. Actually, a little bit of a cloth as well. Maybe we'll block that cloth out over here. Notice I blocked something out there with a color that it's really not. It's sort of more of that whitish blue. Block things in many different ways, but my brush just had that deeper value on it. So I brushed in some of those shadows first. And then I'll just build lighter value on top when I get there. But if I had lighter value and I want to block that in, you can block lighter value and build shadow around it too. These aren't perfect shape, not perfect size, but they're a good start for me to see the rest of my composition, blocking it in fairly quickly. One more big piece of fruit. Actually, two more. We're getting close though. One, two. Especially that first layer. Talked about blocking in multiple ways. I like to block in with that white because it is so opaque. Pretty deep value here. That might be a little heavy, but we'll soften it out. Almost looks like the pit of that peach there. A bit of an earth orange there to mix it out. Minimize it. Alright. Definitely has more red, but place a little bit more here. The cloth. Oop, got a little white on me. The cloth is sort of my largest thing on the table. And it's going to be important for me to block out properly. I'm actually going to start with white. This element here, and kind of just start building in. It's also building out to this side. I think my negative space is pushing in a little bit there. But if you block out with white, which once again is one of, if not the most opaque tones you have, then I can build very easily little bits of blue, or a lot of bits of blue if you want, into what I got going. Same thing in the early stages. I'm not going to just try and paint the entire thing one tone. I'm going to try and observe some of the larger value shifts and some of the folds in the cloth, and just try and place them, even if they're not perfect, even if I place them too dramatically. A little bit of that deeper value there, and then blow it out with white. Really good way to mute any tone that you have. I pulled some of that ultramarine in that was very dramatic, and then reduced it pretty quickly with that black that we mixed. Equal portions ultramarine, raw umber. It's a deeper value and a highlight right next to it. Still using a 1/2-inch flat brush. This is going down further. Main goal, fill in space, getting paint all over the canvas, not leaving any area as that under priming. Call this our first layer of that painting. So even if there are areas that are still a little bit ambiguous or a little bit confusing to you, just block them in, just try your best. But don't spend too much time. Sometimes people think that their best effort is spending long amounts of time on small areas. And it could be in the latter stages of the painting. If you do that too early, sometimes you can run into a lot of issues. So keep painting fairly quickly. Those first coats will really help you see your composition and the rest of your painting. I'm glad I added white because I'm using a lot of white on this. Okay, it kind of pulls off there, and then there's a little bit more of the table on this side, and one more pair. So we're getting close, and then we still have the skull to think about. Which the more I'm thinking about altering, it may be nice to alter the skull, but I don't know, I kind of like it. We'll see, we'll just add it in as is for now, let it dry, and then make a better decision once we think about it. There's a pair, try and build it all the way up into, blue comes across. Okay, there's a loose cloth. Not perfect, but it's placed. Coming in pretty quickly and doing pear. Do a little bit of white. Build it out into a little bit of yellow, starting light, building out into a dark. Then from the yellow I see a little bit of that red, maybe red-orange. Keep mixing. Actually goes all the way out to a green. So a little pear boundary, 1, 2, all the way up and around. And do a little bit of green. A little bit of green in here too. Loose, not perfect. Doesn't matter, he's got some pretty dramatic value shifts at the base of these fruits too. Almost like they're outlined, but more just casting a fairly dramatic shadow on the space around. This has got a pretty dramatic shadow too. Don't be scared to work into areas that you thought were more completed than they actually are. Keep letting the painting be fluid. Okay, looking good. Let me block out this with yellow just a little bit more so I can see it better. Small changes, small incremental changes, consistently, just slowly making your painting a little bit better. Okay, final thing is the skull. So we still have one more thing here. This comes straight across. Right into that. Probably should have done this first before the cloth. But here we are. And that comes straight down. And minor mistakes like that happen. Should have definitely seen the table and then built the cloth on top of it. But it's not a big deal at this point. Just lock in a couple values, get a little bit darker. Should be pretty dark down there. Yeah. That deep value creates a nice contrast in the foreground, hoping to pull your eye towards it. We got a little bit more yellow here. The reflection of the pear. Still need some more opacity. This guy didn't turn out great. That's alright, it's just blocked in for now. Okay, skull. Because the skull has a little bit more detail, I'm going to use an even smaller brush. This is it's a 0, which is I'd say probably 1/4, 1/8 of an inch flat. I'm actually going to start with some of the lighter values here. looking at the skull, I'm going to place some of those highlights. And yellow's good, but yellow can be fairly transparent. Adding a little bit of white at the early stages. And you know what? I think I'm going to go back and I will use this one as well, the very small 0, but I'm also going to use this 6 and kind of mix back and forth. Okay, it builds right into the orbital there. There's this highlight that I placed by the eye. Just a little bit lighter. Come around this edge. Straight down. Push that highlight a little bit further through the nose, coming down here, framing the eye there. Build it out. There's a much deeper value over here. We'll start with something like this, but I think it's bringing a fair amount of that black into it, which we'll do here in a second, once we get it placed a little bit further. Because the orbitals, those eye sockets, are going to be pretty dark. The nose is going to be pretty dark. Some medium value. Across. It was dark. Same thing with the skull. There's definitely more value transitions, more things in here that I'm not going to be planning. Use that smaller brush for these features here. And once again, not perfect, but placed well enough that I can see what's going on. See, this is sort of pushing back this way. This is sort of coming back down. Switch brushes here. Fill the rest of this in. Sort of just fades into the background there. We'll deal with that when we get to it on that second pass. But there we go. We're getting pretty close to finishing this first pass. The background is already basically dried for me, so I'm ready to go back in and start painting the background on that second pass. I'm continuing to reference my source material. I'm trying to make things as accurate as possible. And as I come in, remember, in the sort of final stages, don't know how that guy got in there. Final stages, I have to think about how I'm going to change something within this painting. Would that be changing one of the fruits into something else, maybe something on the skull, some sort of alteration, but something minimal, but still kind of keep the same style as my original artist.